Malik rushed frantically as he stared at the clock on the wall, watching the seconds tick by with a dread that had become all too familiar. His first period history class was the bane of his existence. Ms. Mars, the strict, stone-faced teacher with her perfectly pressed outfits and icy glare, had made it clear it didn't matter if Malik aced every test in her class. If he wasn't on time, he'd fail. And failing meant summer school with her. It wasn't like he didn't try. But lately, the more he tried, the more it seemed like fate itself was against him. Like this morning. He'd stayed up too late playing the new Silent Hill game, engrossed in its eerie world. It was like he blinked and time went from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. By the time he realized, his regular bus was already pulling up to the stop. Malik hastily slung his backpack over his shoulder, debating whether he should just run to school and face being late again. That's when he remembered something he'd overheard from a couple of adults locally. There was another bus stop, barely used and only a few blocks away. Nobody in their right mind ever went there, though. Rumor had it the bus stop was cursed, haunted by the souls of black folks lynched by the KKK in the early 1900s. Malik had scoffed at it when he heard the story. Haunted bus stops sounded like something straight out of one of his video games. But as he stood there, late again, with Ms. Mars' warning ringing in his ears, he figured it was worth a shot. What could it hurt? The old bus stop was just as eerie as the rumors made it out to be. It stood on the edge of a forgotten street, an old, rusted sign creaking in the wind. The stop itself was ancient, covered in cobwebs and grime, its metal bench barely holding together. The wind howled, sending chills up Malik's spine as he stood there, hands in his pockets, shivering in the chilly October air. He glanced at his phone. 20 minutes until the first period. This bus route would drop him about 2 blocks from the school, and he could get there in 5 minutes. He stood there contemplating his decision, thinking maybe it was all just talk. Maybe the bus wasn't even real. But just as that thought crossed his mind, headlights appeared down the street. Malik's eyes widened as the bus rolled up, screeching to a stop. It looked normal enough, like the last generation of the city's buses. Without thinking too much, he stepped on board, greeted by a driver who didn't even glance at him. Malik slid into a seat, relieved that he might just make it on time for once. At first, everything seemed normal. The bus rumbled forward, picking up speed, passing through streets he recognized. But slowly, things began to shift. The modern look of the bus started to fade, as if the years were unraveling before his eyes. The seats grew older, the advertisements and fancy amenities began to fade, and the passengers seemed to transform right before him. The people sitting next to him, who moments ago were texting on their phones or listening to music, now wore clothes from a different era, the 1940s, reading old-timey newspapers and books. The town outside the windows morphed too, the buildings shifting into old brick structures, street lights into street lamps, electric cars disappearing from the streets, and the sounds of the modern world fading into the background. Malik's heart pounded. What was happening? Then it came. The call. All niggers to the back of the bus, the driver barked. His voice was cold, demanding. The black passengers, who were now few in number, exchanged uneasy glances. One by one, they got up and moved to the back, heads bowed, as if it were routine. All except Malik. Nah, he muttered under his breath, gripping the pole in front of him. He just spent 12 hours running from disembodied nurses and a dirty guy built like Brock Lesnar, carrying a large rusty buster sword with a metal pyramid on his head. A mid-sized angry racist white man in a 1940s bus screaming at him paled in comparison. I probably fell asleep on the bus, he thought. Then panic set in. I fell asleep on the bus. Wake up, Mal. Nothing helped though. Boy, I said get to the back, the driver yelled, his eyes still hidden but his face reddening with rage. Malik shook his head, staring defiantly back at the man. Nah, you tweaking da. What followed next happened in a blur. The driver stormed down the aisle, his heavy boots pounding the floor. White passengers stared at Malik with a mixture of shock and disgust, and before he could react, the driver grabbed him by the arm, yanking him from his seat. "Get off my bus," the driver roared, grabbing and shoving Malik toward the door. But Malik wasn't about to back down. He fought back, grabbing onto the seat, refusing to let go. The other white passengers joined in, throwing punches, kicking, and dragging him by his legs. Malik screamed in pain, his grip loosening as the mob descended on him. They pulled him free, dragging him off the bus while still viciously assaulting the teen. In the chaos, Malik noticed the driver being pushed back by the white mob, stumbling backward, his balance thrown off. The driver slipped, tripped on a passenger's leg, and fell hard against the metal flooring of the bus. His head hit the edge of the steel steps with a sickening crack. Malik's stomach churned as he watched the man's body crumple in an unnatural way. The driver lay there, unmoving, his neck clearly broken. But there was no time to process what had just happened. The mob didn't stop. White passengers kept raining blows on him, pulling him toward the door as the scene outside the bus grew darker and more twisted. The Klan appeared, their white robes glowing in the dim light. They surged forward, dragging the black passengers off the bus one by one and beating them brutally. Malik's pulse raced as he fought for his life, blood dripping from his nose, his head pounding from the blows. It quickly became evident to him that this was no dream. The other black passengers tried to reason with the mob, but it was no use. The violence escalated, ropes appearing as the mob began tying nooses around necks. Panic surged through Malik as he managed to slip out of the grasp of one man, breaking free. He ran, fists tightly clenched, his feet pounding the pavement, heart racing as he sprinted toward the school. The closer he got to the school, the more the world around him shifted back to normal. The streets returned to their modern appearance, and the eerie glow of the past faded. Malik's body ached with every step, but he couldn't stop. He had to make it. He stumbled into first period, barely able to stand, his clothes torn and bloodied. Ms. Mars didn't even look up from her desk. "You're late again, Malik," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I don't care what excuses you have. You failed. I'll see you in summer school." Malik, traumatized, his eyes swelling up, didn't argue with her. He made his way to his assigned seat, the rest of the class's shocked gazes fixed upon him. They chattered and mumbled among themselves. Panting and battered, he sat, letting his body melt into the hard plastic seat. From his hand, he released a souvenir. His blurring eyesight inspected it. A name tag. He hadn't realized it until now, but during the fight on the bus, he had grabbed it in desperation, holding onto it for dear life. He read it. Malik began to laugh. Not even the pain from his broken ribs stopped the laughter from growing. "Malik," Ms. Mars uttered, still refusing to look at him. "Interrupting my class means detention." Malik continued to chuckle, leaving his seat, with tears crawling down his bloody, bruised face. He walked past the desk and slammed the name tag on Ms. Mars' desk. Her eyes widened in horror. The name on the tag read Robert Mars. "Guessing your great-grandpappy," Malik spat, his voice shaking. "He's the reason they're dead. The reason that bus is haunted. I see it all runs in the family." Ms. Mars' face drained of color as she stared at the name tag, her hands trembling. The room fell into an eerie silence. For the first time, Malik saw real fear in her eyes. And he walked out, leaving her to face the ghosts of her family's past.